What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit a million orders stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.
Welcome to Dear Prudence. I'm your Prudence, Jenée Desmond-Harris. Today we'll be discussing what to do when your in-laws insult your daughter in a language they don't think you understand, how to decide whether to have a second child as a single 41-year-old, and whether it's okay to reject your husband's calls when you've had a long day and just want to drive home in peaceful silence. Here to help me out is the award-winning journalist Mina Kimes. She's an ESPN NFL analyst, senior writer, and host of the Mina Kimes Show. Welcome, Mina.
Hi. It's something about hearing you give my credentials that as an NFL analyst, it makes me very self-conscious about the advice that I'm about to give, perhaps because people don't usually think of NFL analysts as advice givers in other realms, but I'm delighted to be here.
I mean, you can know about more than one thing. I know nothing about sports, if that makes you feel any better, but somehow I trust your opinion. Also, I couldn't find any sports-related questions for you, despite my best efforts. I wanted to. So instead, we have a random assortment of humans trying to deal with each other.
I love it. And I love the questions you sent. I think they're all really interesting, very meaty, a lot to discuss.
Okay, good. Before we get started, I want to give you a chance to give one piece of unsolicited advice.
Okay. One piece of unsolicited advice. This is career advice I guess I would give to my younger self or to anyone who's interested in pursuing my career. And it maybe sounds a little generic, but I think it's very important, which is to not spend too much time and actually really minimize the time you have thinking about the next job or the next rung on your job and to really focus on the one you're doing at the moment. I think some people confuse that with a lack of ambition. And I know there's been a lot of points in my own career where people have asked me, what would you want to do in 5 years? What do you want to do in 10 years? And I haven't had an answer. And I felt embarrassed that I didn't have an answer or felt like I was, failing womankind or something by not being sufficiently driven or honest about my drive. But the truth is, I really was focused on what I was doing at the time. And I think sometimes that can get lost when we think about our careers.
Which I think makes so much sense. And I'm often telling people not to stress too much about what you're doing at the time, meaning don't worry too much about the individuals who are stressing you out, because in 5 years, you'll forget their names. They'll work in a different industry. Yeah. You won't even remember why every day at work is so horrible. But I do think it makes sense to focus on the job you're doing and do a really good job, which will somehow open up doors for the next thing. I mean, I think you've said before that you couldn't have even imagined doing the work you're doing when you were in college or planning out your career.
No.
And I feel the same.
Yeah.
I definitely wasn't in college going, I want to host an advice podcast, because podcasts didn't exist.
I also think any person who aspires to give advice as a child or college-age person is probably a sociopath, because that shouldn't be something that you think you are qualified to do at that point in your life.
Someone should have to ask you before you even consider it. Okay, Mina and I will dive into your questions after a short break. Want more Dear Prudence? Subscribe to Slate Plus to immediately unlock weekly bonus episodes. Plus, you'll access ad-free listening across all your favorite Slate podcasts. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page. Or visit slate.com/Prudie Plus to get access wherever you listen. Have you ever heard the term nuclear family? The term was coined by an anthropologist in the 1920s to describe the family structure of a straight married couple and their kids. Well, now, over a century later, only about 18% of Americans actually live in a family of that definition. That means that over 82% of Americans represent different kinds of family. From This Is Actually Happening comes the 82%, Modern Stories of Love and Family, a special 6-part series focused on those who have broken away from the norm and challenged society's notions of what a family can be. From an asexual educator and activist raising a child with 2 other co-parents, to a gay man in the clergy who chose the path of celibacy and created a unique family unit with his straight best friend, each episode offers an intimate first-person perspective from those whose family lives have taken different shapes. To listen to the 82% series, follow This Is Actually Happening on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can listen to This Is Actually Happening ad-free on Wondery Plus. Welcome back. You're listening to Dear Prudence, and I'm here with Mina Kimes. Let's get started with our first letter. It's titled Collection.
My first wife and I were world travelers and amassed quite a collection of artifacts and oddities that I'm very proud of to this day. My partner and I are at a divide over what is to be done with it. We both are retired and plan to move in together. The house has 3 bedrooms. She wants her craft room and a guest room for her grandchildren. I don't think it is her responsibility to take 2 whole rooms while I reduce my collection to a few pieces to display in the house. I also want a door that locks because her grandchildren have sticky fingers and lax parenting. There have been several incidents. My suggestion was to put a daybed in her craft room. She turned around and said that my attachment to my collection was because I still wasn't over my divorce. I will admit that the divorce came out of nowhere and left me very depressed until I met my partner, but we've been together for 5 years. I think this is a low blow. These are memories of travel and excitement to me. She's already sold her house and is living with me. I was in the process of listing my place when this issue came up. I don't know how to proceed here. Help.
I have one practical piece of advice for just thinning out the collection a little. Go through everything and look for a small print that says Made in China if you didn't get the item in China. Because I know I've picked up some things from Ghana and South Africa that I thought were super special, authentic souvenirs. And then it turned out they were just there to trick tourists like me. So just one thought that might decrease the collection by about a third.
Wow.
But on a more serious note, I know it must be hard to merge lives with someone when you've reached grandparent age and are pretty set in your ways. And I think this is a huge example of that. I'm wondering why this kind of thing wasn't discussed before moving in together.
Yeah.
Or before getting the wheels in motion to move in together.
I have a lot of thoughts about this. My first is that I think it's a little hard for me to know exactly what's realistic here or feasible without quite understanding the logistics of it, which is to say, my immediate reaction is I don't understand why the collection can't be in the. How big is this collection? Does it require? It's apparently it's so big that it requires its own room. When I think about artifacts, and I grew up with grandparents who traveled a lot and had a lot of artifacts, I guess, things that they collected along the way, but they were displayed throughout the house, and I think that's pretty normal. I think it's pretty unusual for anyone to have so big of a collection that it requires its own room, and in fact, that somebody who doesn't want things displayed throughout their house so people can see it and ask about it. But let's put a pin in that, starting from the point that it's unrealistic or not feasible for him to put his things around the house or even put them in the craft room. I thought his question betrayed some deeper tensions beyond there's not enough room for all my stuff. He talked about his new wife needing 2 rooms, one for her grandchildren. Jarred me a little bit because, well, they're your grandchildren too now. Like, don't you want them to visit? Point. Don't you want them to have their own room? And the fact that he kind of so clearly delineated that as being her room and her kids and sticky fingers, I thought that to me is the bigger issue here, not the stuff and where to put the stuff.
And what about the little note of hostility about poor parenting or something? Yeah. That is the reason the grandchildren can't be trusted around the artifacts. Oh, maybe that's why he wants the museum room to protect all his stuff. But yeah, I definitely picked up on the underlying tensions there for sure. And the lack of kind of unity, which again, I get that you get to a certain age, you've lived a full life, you are your own person. These aren't 2 22-year-olds merging lives. But you would hope that you'd kind of think of those grandchildren as, if not your very own, then at least kids who you love
Right.
and want to have a place to sleep.
Yeah. So I guess what would you say then, as we kind of were discussing this and hitting on the fact that maybe there's a different conversation that needs to be had? Do you feel like that would be the advice required here?
I mean, I think there's almost always a bigger conversation. If I had to answer this letter in, 10 words or less, I would say, you don't have to move in together, right? Like, you actually can just have a relationship and live separately if you want to. I mean, I don't know exactly where we are with all the different real estate negotiations that are going on, but I would strongly suggest putting the brakes on this, because it's my huge suspicion that this isn't going to be the only point of tension.
Yeah.
I can imagine conflicts around cleanliness, around laundry, around cooking and who's doing it, around who's staying up late to watch TV and whether they should be getting in bed with their spouse. I mean, there are just all these things that you have to negotiate when you live with someone. And if you aren't in a place where you each kind of are being really generous and want the best for the other person and want to accommodate them, you're going to have a lot of problems. And it doesn't seem that you two are there.
Yeah, I think my thoughts are along those lines as well, which are that you have to resolve these other tensions before you move in together. And if you do, go ahead. But you have to ask yourself, do I want to live in a house with someone whose grandchildren? Do I want them to be part of my life? Do I want to merge our existences in a way that this seems to be at odds with this letter? And if not, like you said, don't do it. But if you can get there, then you have to get there. There's no real you can't half live together.
Yeah, and we skipped something huge, which is the allegation by his partner that he's not over his ex-wife.
Oh, yeah, right.
Which is either a real concern or an example of lashing out to hurt him.
Yes. Yeah.
Either one of which I think is another check in the
on her side
category.
Yes, I think that's in fairness needs to be addressed. Like we're saying, well, it feels like you're not quite ready because you don't really want a grandchildren. You're kind of judgy of them, but she might not be ready if she thinks that you're not over your ex. And I think we're not accusing him of that at all. But
no,
clearly,
not at all. But if she feels that way, that's something else that's going to come up in other ways, right?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe he's still in touch with other people from that family. Is he going to be allowed to have the photo albums? I can just imagine a lot of points of tension. Also, I'm not saying you two have to break up. There are a lot of people who live very happily in separate homes.
Yeah.
You can have great companionship. You can see each other a lot. If it's a matter of money, you can both get an apartment and live near each other. And it might be just a really delightful way to enjoy the things you enjoy about each other without having to compromise on the things you don't want to compromise about. Anyway, good luck with that. Our next question is titled, I Just Need Some Peace and Quiet.
Relatively low stakes relationship question, but I want to know if I'm some inconsiderate monster. I've been with my husband for 13 years and married for 10. Our relationship is good, not great, due to some infidelity on his part, but we made a choice to stay together and work on it for the kids' sake. 4 years ago, I moved to a higher position and am in charge of close to 200 employees, most of which are males. I truly have an open door policy, which is used a lot by my employees, as I'm approachable and truly care about their well-being. I also work at the busiest distribution center and deal with a lot of situations that I couldn't even make up if I wanted to. Since I moved to this location, my husband has become insecure and jealous, even though I've never given him any reason to. Recently, I've asked him to stop something which has sent him over the edge. Since the start of our relationship, we would always call after work and talk on the drive home. After 4 years of being at this new place, I am burnt out at the end of the day and want nothing more than to turn my mind off on the drive home. I've recently asked him to stop calling me so I can recharge mentally before I get in the house and resume my mom responsibilities. He now says I care about everyone except him and refuses to pick up any call from me when he's out of the house. I told him that he could call if it's something important, if he needs to vent or whatever, not just to say hi when I'll see him in 15 minutes, and can have the chat then. He still refuses to answer any calls, and I think he's acting like a child. This has caused a lot of resentment on his part, which I don't understand. I just want my 15 minutes. Is that too much to ask?
There's so much going on here between the cheating, the jealousy, the decision to stick with a marriage that's good but not great, the contempt, the retaliation, the resentment, tons to unpack. But one thing that popped in my mind when I first read it was, I wonder if you can relate to this as someone who has to talk a lot for work. Like, do you need some time to decompress and not speak to anyone when you're done?
It's less for me that I don't want to talk, but I don't want to talk about sports.
Okay,
and
fair.
I have the reverse of, I believe, your relationship, because you mentioned you don't watch sports. I know your husband. That's how we do that. Is I know your husband's sports. So my husband doesn't watch sports either, and I love that because I do not want to talk about sports at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So it's wonderful for me.
Do you get annoyed too when you're just out and about living your regular life and people want to talk to you about sports and you have to kind of turn on and do your analysis?
I don't. It depends on the nature of it. I find sometimes that people just want to almost like audition for first take to me or give their opinions loudly. So that can be a little bit tough, especially if you're like stuck in an Uber with someone who wants to do that. But I don't mind if people ask questions, and especially if they're like generally friendly and positive. But for the most part, I do enjoy the break.
But I do bet you're in a relatively healthy marriage, and that if you said, I was just talking on TV for hours, can I like have 15 minutes of silence? I doubt your husband would.
He would not mind. Yeah, he
would.
And her situation is not particularly relatable to me.
No. So it reminds me of the first question, because it's just one of those things where I think in a healthy relationship, if these people were in a good place and each kind of wanted the best for each other, this would be a non-issue, right?
Yeah, I agree.
The letter writer would say, I'm super stressed. You know how crazy it is in this department with all these wild antics and all these people coming in my office all day. I just want to be quiet in the car and I'll talk to you at home. And her husband would say, oh, fine. I'm so glad you're finding a chunk of time to relax.
Yeah.
Can't wait to talk to you. But of course, there's so many deeper issues here. First of all, the nerve of him being insecure and jealous when he's the one who cheated.
I find, and this is mostly just based on friends who have been through these experiences, that's not entirely uncommon. When someone is unfaithful, they end up sort of projecting that onto their partner, and often the people who cheat can be the most insecure people afterwards, especially.
Yeah.
Perhaps I'm not a psychologist. I don't know, but perhaps there is a little bit of imagined retribution at play. I would guess. I don't know, but it's just something I have noticed in stories that people have told me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But I'm sure it's still just so infuriating for the letter writer. I mean, she actually doesn't seem that upset about his jealousy. She just wants to be left alone for a little while. I would love to ask them more about how they decided to stay together and work on things for the kids, and what has working on things looked like, and is working on things working.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like they just decided to stay together, and there's not a lot being done to address like all the underlying feelings from before the infidelity and that resulted from the infidelity.
Yeah, I feel like this is a question where, like, she's so obviously in the right. So we start there. This is like one of those questions where, like, it's like, am I wrong? And then they tell a story and you're like, okay, you're telling this because you know you're in the right. Like, I'm not accusing this person of tilting the question in her own favor. I'm sure she's relaying it accurately. But, like, I think, 99 people out of 100, a panel of 100 would agree you're correct. But it's hard to know what kind of advice to give. This feels like a question that her partner needs to ask more, which is, why am I so jealous? What is driving this? And it feels like that's something that he needs to work on, not her.
Right. And what am I doing to repair the relationship that I messed up? I get the idea that sometimes when infidelity happens, it's an opportunity for both people to look at what they were doing to make the relationship struggle. But I really think when you're the one who cheated and you convince the other person to stay together for the kids' sake, you kind of get what you get as far as their behavior going forward. And of course, you can decide if that doesn't work for you and you want out. But I think you should give them at least a little more flexibility. I mean, she gave you this pass and stayed with you after stepping outside the marriage, and you can't let her have 15 minutes of quiet on the way home. It just seems really unfair to me.
Definitely. Yeah. I do wonder what's at the bottom of it. I also, now that we've kind of gotten through the more serious side of this, as a married person who spends a lot of time with her husband, I can't imagine wanting to talk to him on the phone on the way to being home with him. I'm just like, would you, like, is that, Am I wrong? That's a lot.
Yeah, it does seem like a lot. And I guess it's kind of sweet that they've had this tradition. Maybe once they get home, the kids are wild and they don't get to speak to each other.
That could be it.
But
yeah.
I'm sure there's another 15-minute block of time where they could catch up, right?
Yeah.
I think he would be fine not talking to her if he wasn't in this like heightened state of borderline panic over, like you said, the idea that he cheated and now she's perhaps not totally over it because they haven't done the work and she's around all these men who are coming in and out of her office. And now suddenly she's pulling back a little bit.
Yeah.
But to the letter writer, I think I would say to stand firm. You know, I hate that your husband isn't answering your calls and he's being a total child about it. You're correct that he is acting like a child. Yeah. There's no good outcome that comes from saying, okay, you win since you won't answer my calls on Saturdays when I'm grocery shopping. I'll talk to you now. That's not going to get you two to a happy place.
Yeah, I think if I was her, I would ask him, what is it about this particular ritual that you feel you need in your life? What are you getting out of it that you're not able to get from me at home or whatnot? And maybe he says, you know, I feel like I can open up to you over the phone and I don't know, whatever. Maybe he has an explanation. And then if he doesn't have an explanation, I think you have to suggest maybe we bring in a third person to discuss this with, because it's clearly causing you a lot of problems or angst rather.
It goes without saying that part of deciding to stay together after infidelity and working on things for the kids should be therapy, so that hopefully you can get to a place where you're working on it for yourselves too.
Yeah. And it can be presented in a way that's not adversarial. I think so often when we say, you know, you guys should see a therapist, it sounds like, oh, someone has to bring that and the other person's unwilling. It can, you know, I think it can actually be introduced as like hey, I think this is going to, it's like getting a personal trainer. I think this is going to like help us both and make our relationship even better. And then we won't have to have this conversation that's giving you this untold, sort of fulfillment that is mysterious to you and me.
Yeah. And also, if you like talking to me so much, let's make it official. An hour a week appointment.
Exactly.
And a professional to really enhance it. So yeah, don't give in, letter writer. But if you want to be happier in this relationship, rather than just thinking about who's right and wrong, I do think you want to go deeper, see if your husband can be mature enough to open up instead of just retaliating. And yeah, absolutely. This talking and chatting should be happening on somebody's couch in addition.
Not a car.
Instead of in the car. Yeah. You're listening to the Dear Prudence Show. And when we come back, we'll be reading more of your letters. Stay with us. Have you ever heard the term nuclear family? The term was coined by an anthropologist in the 1920s to describe the family structure of a straight, married couple and their kids. Well, now, over a century later, only about 18% of Americans actually live in a family of that definition. That means that over 82% of Americans represent different kinds of family. From This Is Actually Happening comes The 82%, Modern Stories of Love and Family, a special 6-part series focused on those who have broken away from the norm and challenge society's notions of what a family can be. From an asexual educator and activist raising a child with 2 other co-parents, to a gay man in the clergy who chose the path of celibacy and created a unique family unit with his straight best friend, each episode offers an intimate first-person perspective from those whose family lives have taken different shapes. To listen to the 82% series, follow This Is Actually Happening on the Wondery app or wherever you get your podcasts. You can listen to This Is Actually Happening ad-free on Wondery Plus.
America. We are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. At Grand Canyon University, we believe in equal opportunity, and the American dream starts with purpose. To serve others in ways that promote human flourishing and create a ripple effect of transformation for generations to come. Find your purpose at Grand Canyon University. Private, Christian, affordable. Visit gcu.edu.
Welcome back to Dear Prudence. I'm here with my guest Mina to answer your letters, and the next one is titled, It's Not Just Baby Fever.
I am a 41-year-old single mother to a 15-year-old. 15 years ago, I had a rough pregnancy, made more complicated by my ex pulling away, and events that would lead us to divorce about a year later. I was unsupported by my workplace, I was barely supported by my friends, many of whom didn't want children, and some of whom made it clear they thought the whole situation was odd and dumb. My baby came out sick and was whisked away before I got more than a moment with them. I fought with PPD, anxiety, and struggled with little help or support at that time, again, all made worse by my failing relationship. Growing up, I had always thought I'd have 2 or 3 kids. Now I just have the one. I absolutely love my child, but I feel lost, like I should have had more. Since my child was born, I have moved to a completely different city, have mostly new friends, got a new job, and everything is a complete 180 from where it had been. No new partner, though. As I'm now a nurse and work in a NICU, I'm watching work friends get pregnant and have the support I dreamed about 15 years ago. Coworkers put on a baby shower. If someone needs to pump, they're covered. No fighting about it, no having to threaten lawyers, no being interrupted. If they give birth early or something happens, there is no pressure to rush back to work because the leave guidelines are very well spelled out. Still, I find myself wishing I was pregnant again and getting to experience everything. Alas, it's unlikely to happen. I'm on the older side, and I desperately don't want to parentify my 15-year-old. My schedule is such that my kid would wind up watching and caring for a younger sibling for at least a few hours. While my parents helped me with my child way back when, they are much older now, in their late 70s versus their early 60s, and my mom is physically much more disabled. While it's possible I'll find a partner in the next year or two, I'm also not really active on dating sites or looking very hard. The last 2 I've had hadn't worked out, and putting the time in is difficult. I love my life. I am happy. But how do I let go of this last bit?
This is really rough. I just want to point out, I know the letter writer knows what she's talking about as a NICU nurse, but I'm not sure things are quite as amazing for new mothers in 2024 as the letter writer seems to think they are. Like, I know that her experience was really awful and things have gotten better in terms of leave and all of that, but people still really struggle with a lack of support, with having to go back to work sooner than they wanted to. I would just suggest thinking about the idea that the second time around would not be all sunshine and rainbows and ease. In fact, it would probably be very hard in a lot of ways again, even if you had a bit more support.
Yeah, it's a good point. And yeah, when I read this, I was thinking about the contrast between her experience and my own, which was supported to the point where I actually, not to bring myself into too much, but I feel guilty whenever complaining about it, I have an 8-month-old child, just because I think I have the sort of experience that she's maybe seeing from afar and thinking, God, I wish I had that, where I've had leave, I had so much support, I had financial support, professional support, family, all of that. And that's my own thing in terms of feeling guilty about having it too easy, right? But anyways, as I was reading her letter and thinking I could imagine someone who had a really difficult seeing someone like me, for example, maybe not, generalizing and thinking, God, it would have been so nice to go through this.
Yeah.
But she, in her own letter, seems aware that it wouldn't be that way. It outlines the many challenges that she would face to even having a child. And then she also outlines the challenges that would come next. Having to get help from her relatives would be challenging, her job, her age, all of it. So she, this person clearly knows it wouldn't be that easy. And yet it's almost like a fantasy that she's holding on to. And she's kind of asking us, how do I move on from this fantasy? She seems pretty aware that it is just that.
Right. Yeah. And I think in the intro, when I talked about this, I read it as she was trying to decide whether or not to have another one. And she's not. She knows that it probably wouldn't be a good idea. And it sounds to me like maybe what she actually wants is to heal from the trauma of the first experience. Which was so isolating, so disappointing, and so upsetting. And she's been holding out the idea that having number 2 would be the thing that created that healing. And maybe that could come from somewhere else. Again, therapy is really good for sort of processing and taking down the intensity on that kind of really bad experience so that it doesn't bother you as much anymore, even if it's obviously still something that you experience and that you think about sometimes. I also think I feel badly for her because she works in the NICU, so she's always around new babies. And it's hard to just not think about this, right?
Yeah.
Even if a small part of her wants another child, she can't just kind of stop going to baby showers and change her Instagram algorithms so she's not confronted with babies every day. They're there in her face and she's dealing with them. So I just think that adds another layer of complication.
I think you were spot on. We talked about sort of confronting her trauma and healing. This perhaps is not the right way to do that, but it sounds like she could really help other people too.
Yes, totally.
And for some people, that can be healing, the opportunity to sort of help people have the experience that you didn't have, or help people who are similarly challenged in a way you were challenged, giving them some light at the end of the tunnel a little bit as well, because she so clearly has moved on and become an amazing parent and very fulfilled parent. For people who are going through that in the way that she was a long time ago, I'm sure that could be really helpful.
We're on the same page. I actually wrote down, find a single mom who could use help and offer to support or babysit.
Yeah.
I think that'd be fantastic, whether it's a teen mom or someone you find through a local nonprofit. I don't think there's a person in the world who has a baby without a partner who isn't pretty desperately in need of some help.
Yeah.
So I think that could be super rewarding. And I think that could really be a part of the healing process too. I completely agree. Like repairing this experience for someone else in a way you couldn't do for yourself. My other ideas, which are like not totally satisfying, but just might help to think about, were to just really lean into raising your 15-year-old. You still have a child. Like that kid's childhood isn't over. There's at least 3 more years, probably closer to 5, 6 in this day and age. And there's still mothering to be done. And there's still mothering to be done under these better circumstances when you have more to offer and you're not as stressed. So you might just think about focusing on really enjoying that experience and kind of savoring it before your kid's an adult.
Yeah. And I think I really like your point about sort of her current child, because I think she seems very aware that having another child would come at a cost in terms of like time and everything. And then think about the freedom of not having another child and all the free time that you have to do different kinds of things to bond with your current child. I think there's a lot of opportunity there still.
Yeah, it's actually something to celebrate, and you don't want too much of that time to pass while you think about what could have been. This is Dear Prudence. We need to take a break, but when we come back, more letters from you and advice from us. Stay tuned. I'm Jenée, and you're listening to Dear Prudence. Mina and I are about to tackle our last question for the day. Mina, are you ready?
Let's do it.
Okay, this letter is titled Language Barrier.
My wife is an immigrant and speaks 3 languages. I'm an adult learner of languages. I can follow most conversations in her native language, and I can read at an intermediate level. My teenage daughter has made an effort to learn the language too, but doesn't get a lot of support from her mother or her school. It's not even offered at her school. So really, her only experience is with us. Still, she's trying. My wife had relatives stay with us for several weeks recently because their college-age daughter was looking at universities here. We bent over backwards to cook and accommodate them, including driving them everywhere. Well, my daughter came to stay with us for the weekend, and when she was here, she tried to converse with the daughter and mother in their language. I was in the kitchen, and they insulted my daughter to her face with big smiles and called her a fat cow in their language. I didn't want to confront them with my daughter there, so I waited until they left and then told them in their own language that I heard every word and that they would need to cut their trip short. My wife was away on business, and I didn't want to have that conversation with her over the phone, so she was very confused as to why her relatives were leaving so suddenly. When I told her the truth, she got angry and said that I seriously shamed her with her family and caused a big rift. I asked her what she expected me to do. Nothing? Well, that is exactly what she wanted. My daughter wasn't aware of the insults, and I didn't bring it up. My wife would have handled it later with her relatives privately. I am just appalled here, and I don't know what to do. My wife has always been friendly and sweet to my daughter. They get along, I thought. So, what now?
I just have to admit, I kind of love the way he stood up for his daughter. I found it really moving.
You can tell he took a lot of pride in saying, and I told them in their language. I heard every word.
Yeah, totally.
That's such a fantasy of mine, by the way, is to hear people talking about me in a language and then being able to, it's like a thing that happens in movies.
Absolutely,
you know?
Yeah. Or on TikTok, yeah.
Like at a restaurant, I'm on to you, you know.
So I like the way he stood up for her. I like what it says about their relationship. I have to say, I feel like the more responsible thing to do would have been to pause, take into consideration that it's not as if the daughter was in immediate physical danger or emotional danger since she didn't know what was said. This wasn't an emergency. So he probably should have called his wife, gritted his teeth through the rest of the visit, and asked his wife afterwards to agree not to have these people come back.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement with you. I think he was both wrong and right at the same time. The problem here is not that he wanted to defend his daughter or even that he wanted them to not be in his house. I think that he has every right to do that. The problem is he acted unilaterally, right?
Yeah.
That's where he put his wife in a difficult position, not with his stance on defending the daughter, but on his execution, which is kicking them out before she could even get involved.
Right.
And I think, by the way, if he had gone to his wife and said, I need you to tell them, and then the wife said no, then he would have a case. And that's a totally different disagreement, and one that I think I would probably side with him, because I think that's like wildly inappropriate on the part of relatives. But it never got to that point because of the way he acted, like you said, so quickly without her. And I think that's where he erred here. So what would you do next? Because what's done is done. Because we talked about, I think we were in agreement with what went wrong.
I mean, does he have to apologize to these people for kicking them out?
I think he apologizes to his wife for kicking them out, not to them.
Good point. Apologizes to his wife, says, I should have handled it differently. I love my daughter. I got so upset. I'm realizing now that we could have talked about this together, even though you and I both know that she was never going to agree not to have these people come back. Yeah. But he can pretend. Also, I think going forward, you need a new household rule, which is that everyone deals with their own parents.
Yes.
I don't think you should be hosting your in-laws when your wife isn't there. That's just a recipe for misunderstanding, awkwardness, and potential disaster like we have here.
Yeah, unless you have a great relationship. So much tension in marriages comes from, this is not my story, but I just know from other people, when the other person's parents are acting out of pocket and then your partner won't handle it, right? And but you should never be in the position to where you're the person who has to do it. And it's ultimately the conflict is never between you and your partner's parents, it's between you and your partner. And I think that's the case here.
And I think it would be appropriate for the letter writer to say, if his wife insists on having them come back, well, my daughter and I are going to go for a weekend getaway. Yeah. Because I'm not going to have her standing in the kitchen being called a fat cow or getting even a look that suggests someone thinks she's a fat cow. It's not a safe place for her.
If the wife insists on having them back, then she also should be responsible for explaining to the daughter what happened. And if she's not comfortable, I think that should say it all.
Absolutely. Okay, those are all the questions we have for this week. It's been fun and hopefully helpful. Thank you, Mina.
Thank you so much. This is fun.
Watch and listen to Mina on ESPN's daily news and information show NFL Live, Get Up, SportsCenter, First Take, and more. Also, listen to her sports podcast, The Mina Kimes Show, featuring Lenny, where she talks about all things football. Do you need help getting along with partners, relatives, coworkers, and people in general? Write to me. Go to slate.com/Prudie. That's slate.com/PRUDIE. The Dear Prudence column publishes every Thursday.
If you'd like to hear your question answered on the podcast, we are looking for letter writers who would be comfortable recording their questions for the show. You can stay anonymous.
Dear Prudence is produced by Se'era Spragley Ricks and me, Jenée Desmond-Harris, with a special thanks to Maura, Currie. Editorial help from Paola de Verona. Daisy Rosario is senior supervising producer, and Alicia Montgomery is Slate's VP of audio. I'm your Dear Prudence, Jenée Desmond-Harris. That's all for this episode, but join us on today's episode of Prudie Plus. Mina stuck around and shared her mantra for dealing with trolls online, why being an NFL analyst is a little like being an advice columnist, and much more. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/Prudie Plus to get access wherever you listen. The episode is available for you to listen to right now. We'll see you there.
With the Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere. This is your captain speaking. We've got clear runway and the weather's fine, but we're just going to circle up here a while and get lucky. No, nothing like that. It's just these cash prizes add up quick. So I suggest you sit back, keep your tray table upright, and start getting lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.